That's right, it's your boy. Today, we are creating the ultimate Legolas build in Baldur's Gate 3. This will also be a perfect build for anyone who wants to play a heavy-hitting archer, but also have the dual-wielding capability to deal just as much damage. Honestly, there are really so many different ways to create a Legolas build, it can be hard to even choose a starting point, but I did my best to make it so we can really feel like Legolas on the battlefield. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future builds or content. And I will also be doing the rest of the Fellowship in the future. With that being said, welcome to Purge Evil. Thank you for stopping by. Let's get into it. Level 1, Ranger 1. I've decided to start Legolas as a ranger mainly for the reason of dexterity proficiency. This will help our DC in saving throws, and with us being at range most of the time, we're going to be attacked with spells and the like more often than a sword. And also, it just makes sense for Legolas, right? Our favorite enemy here is going to be Bounty Hunter. We won't get to make use of this until later in the game, but what it will do is cause enemies to have disadvantage on the ensnared saving throw, making it more likely to succeed. Now, if you want something to use until we get to Ranger 2 later on, you can take Keeper of the Veil for protection from evil and good, which can kind of fit Legolas as he seemingly is invincible. Legoland could probably take any of the natural explorer options, to be honest, so for build purposes I would highly recommend you take the Wasteland Wanderer Fire for the fire resistance, as it is the most common element throughout the game. If you don't have someone else dedicated to picking locks, you could also go ahead and take Urban Tracker for the sleight of hand buff, and my third option would be Beast Tamer, but this would mostly be for flavor because while some of the familiar's abilities can be useful, I found that more often than not they were basically useless in most fights. One could argue that they come in handy in the beginning of Act 1, but I'd say fire resistance is still the better option. Ability scores. Strength at 16, and we're mainly putting stats here for jumping, and because Legolas isn't exactly a weak guy, being able to repeatedly pull and fire his longbow for hours at a time, all the while parkouring around the battlefield. Dexterity at 16, and obviously our main focus is going to be dexterity as it boosts our finesse weapons and bows, gives us higher initiative so we take our turn early in the round if not first, and will also help us to dodge incoming attacks. Legolas is not only strong but extremely nimble. Constitution at 14, we don't need any more, any less. 14 is the perfect level for Legolas. Intelligence at 8, we don't need it. Moving on to wisdom at 12, mainly for saves, and I think Legolas would actually have some points invested here. Alternatively, you could split intelligence and wisdom 10-10. Charisma, leave that at 8 because Legolas might have Orlando Bloom's face, but that doesn't make him Orlando Bloom. Now realistically, we just don't need this at all. Level 2, Fighter 1. At level 2, we have some different pathways to take. The first route would be immediately speccing into Fighter and taking it to 5 so we can have Action Surge and our extra attack by level 6. Our other option would see us having Hordebreaker early on instead of Action Surge and extra attack, but in my opinion it's more useful to have the fighter abilities first, so that's what we're gonna do. Taking our first level into fighter, we get a self-heal ability that heals us for a 1d10 plus our fighter level. This is also a bonus action and recharges on a short rest, so use it tactically. We also gain access to our first fighting style of the build, which will of course be none other than Archery, granting us a +2 bonus to our ranged weapon attack rolls, and while it doesn't seem like much, it actually does make a huge difference when we're talking about d20s. Level 3, Fighter 2. We now gain the Action Surge ability, allowing us a second action when activated, meaning we can now attack twice in a single turn. This ability recharges on a short rest, so make sure you use it when facing a priority enemy or if you need to kill 2 enemies in the same turn. Level 4, Fighter 3. Moving on, we now take Fighter 3, which is an exciting level because now we will unlock the Battle Master subclass. Legoland is an extremely skilled fighter and is able to make use of several techniques during combat. With this subclass, we unlock maneuvers and superiority dice to use them with. These are d8 dice that are added to our damage or rolls when used. We're going to take Precision Attack, Trip Attack, and for our third one, we have 2 options, Disarming Attack or Menacing Attack. I'll go over both of those in just a moment. First, Precision attack will roll the D8 superiority dice and add the result to our next attack roll. This helps to ensure that we won't miss and is especially useful for high defense enemies and also using the sharpshooter passive, which we will unlock next level. Trip attack is one of my favorite abilities in the entire game, as it allows you to not only deal an extra 1d8 of damage, it has a good chance to prone your target, allowing for a heavy follow-up from either you or a teammate. There will almost never be a fight where this won't be useful. A nice combo would be to trip attack with your bow, pop action surge, and move in for a possible crit on the prone enemy with your melee weapons. For our third maneuver, we have a choice between disarming attack or menacing attack, both very useful in their own right. To be more true to character, I would go with disarming attack. Disarming attack allows Legolas to line up his bow for a trick shot that has a chance to knock the target's weapons out of its hands while also dealing an extra 1d8 of damage. This will allow Aragorn or Gimli to quickly pick up the enemy's weapon, rendering them nearly completely defenseless on the battlefield. Our other option is menacing attack, which may be a little less true to character, but is a very healthy option nonetheless and should be mentioned. This power shot deals an additional 1d8 damage while also having the chance to frighten the enemy, which is a condition that immobilizes the enemy and causes them to have disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls, allowing for big follow-up attacks. Note that some enemies you face will not be holding weapons, so disarming attack will only add extra damage, while menacing attack will work on most, if not all, enemies in the game. I know I gave you two options there, but there's actually a third option, and that is pushing attack. While not as useful as the other maneuvers early on, this becomes extremely useful later on once we unlock the hordebreaker ability, as it will allow us to push an enemy with our first attack closer to another enemy, and with our second attack we will now be able to use hordebreaker on both of them. Just something to keep in mind. This one also does an additional 1d8 of damage. Use your maneuvers often to keep the upper hand, and keep in mind that your superiority dice will recharge on short rests. Level 5, Fighter 4. At level 5 we get our very first feat, and since we're able to have advantage on nearly every enemy we face, we are going to take Sharpshooter, which completely removes the low ground disadvantage penalty. We also gain a passive which will give us a -5 penalty to our ranged attack roll, but gives a +10 increase to damage in turn. Remember that this passive can be toggled off just in case you don't have a high enough chance to hit your enemy, which most likely will not happen often, as we will basically always have advantage on our enemies, making Sharpshooter a huge increase to our power, especially at such an early level. Level 6, Fighter 5. At level 6 we simply unlock our extra attack, enabling Legolas to fire his bow a second time during his turns, and 4 times if we activate Action Surge. There's nothing else to really say about this, but before we move on, we'll be taking 2 rogue levels next to increase our damage output even further, saving Hordebreaker for last. If you want Hordebreaker now instead of later, go ahead and take 2 ranger levels next, and you can go ahead and skip to levels 10 and 11 for an overview of both of those levels. Level 7, Rogue 1. At level 7, we are officially going to multi-class yet again into Rogue. The reason we're taking Rogue is not to sneak around, but to gain the sneak attack ability. This is essentially just a 1d6 bonus to our damage when we have advantage. Note that you do not need to be sneaking in order to use this, you simply just need advantage. This is another ability that can only be used once per turn, which is just fine. This is a very nice buff to stack onto our build and will help us to completely destroy our enemies. We also get some nice additions to our skills, and you can allocate these however you see fit with what is most useful for your party composition. My recommendations would be Perception or Insight, Investigation, and Sleight of Hand. Legolas does the lockpicking in my run, but you could swap this out for Stealth, though we really don't need it. I like taking Perception or Insight on a lot of builds whenever possible, as they are some of the most heavily used checks throughout the game and can completely change the course of a conversation or trek through a dungeon. Investigation is useful for the same reason, though it doesn't seem to appear as often. Level 8, Rogue 2. For level 8, we will take another level into Rogue to give us our cunning actions, which are bonus action versions of Hide, Dash, and Disengage. You'll definitely appreciate the extra utility, and being able to hide before you attack sets up some pretty devastating damage. Alternatively, you can hide after taking your turn so enemies won't be able to attack you. Level 9, Fighter 6. Now with Fighter 6, we unlock our second feat, which simply will be ability improvement to increase boosts our dexterity to 18, preparing us nicely for Act 3 and, depending on your choices, the end of Act 2. Level 10, Ranger 2. Here at level 10, we begin to level up our Ranger class yet again with Ranger 2, unlocking 2 spells to use in our second fighting style. For the fighting style, the only correct choice to make is to take 2 weapon fighting, so Legolas can be a bit more effective with his long knives should the need arise. This is very useful as it adds our ability modifier to our offhand attacks, making dual wielding even more viable. For our very first spell, we will finally be adding Ensnaring Strike. This is either a melee or ranged attack that deals weapon damage and has a chance to ensnare the target. With our favored enemy being Bounty Hunter, our enemies will have disadvantage on the saving throw, making our ensnare more likely to be a success. When ensnared, creatures cannot move and also take 1d6 piercing damage at the start of each turn. This attack uses an action, bonus action, and spell slot, so make sure you only use this when necessary. Note that to keep the target ensnared, you must maintain concentration, which shouldn't be too difficult, and most likely the target will die sooner rather than later. For our second spell, Hunter's Mark is a nice little buff that adds yet another extra 1d6 of damage to our attacks on the target we've applied this spell's condition to. After casting this spell and killing the target, as long as you're maintaining concentration, you'll be able to recast this spell on your next enemy and so forth all the way up until your long rest without expending any more spell slots, making this a beautiful spell to have. Stacking this with a maneuver or sneak attack can lead to some massive damage. We're gonna save Longstrider for Aragorn, which he will unlock much earlier in the game, just in case you were wondering why I didn't include it here, and that goes for Enhanced Leap as well. Level 11, Ranger 3. I struggled at first between Hunter and Gloomstalker, not for character or flavor, but simply the mechanics of each. We're gonna use Hunter because we're able to use Hordebreaker technically every round as opposed to Dread Ambush, which is only on the first turn. For that reason, Gloomstalker, you're out. As I mentioned earlier, we won't be optimizing for stealth, so naturally Hunter with Hordebreaker is going to fit Legolas much better. Hordebreaker is a very fun technique to use as it allows you to attack 2 enemies that are close by each other. The way this works is you fire Hordebreaker at a single enemy and the shot will have a radius around it. Any other enemy within that radius is then opened up to a Hordebreaker follow-up attack that does not use an action or a bonus action, essentially giving us a free attack. Just remember that they have to be close enough together for this to work. The reason I didn't take this at earlier levels is simply because sometimes you just won't have enemies close enough for this to work, and Action Surge is much more versatile in that regard. You can only use this attack once per turn, which isn't a problem, just something to note. For our spell, we're gonna take Hail of Thorns, and I'm gonna be honest guys, I just think this attack is fun and it's pretty decent as well, although it is almost as resource heavy as Ensnaring Strike. This spell attack will shoot a volley of thorns, dealing weapon damage and also exploding, dealing 1d10 piercing damage to the target and any creatures caught within the radius. You might not use this one as much, but I think it's fun enough to include as opposed to our other options. Level 12, Ranger 4. Finally at level 12, we take Ranger 4, unlocking our third feat, which will be ability improvement to cap off our build with 20 dexterity. We also now have 3 spell slots, which is just lovely. At this point, Legolas is the ultimate archer that he is meant to be, especially with the gear I'm going to recommend in just a few moments. But before that, if you have any suggestions, definitely let me know down in the comments, as this is actually my very first archery build, and I could quite possibly see myself updating it in the future, though at this point in time, I'm very happy with what I've created, and I know you're gonna have fun with it as well. Bonus points if you use this build with Ascended Astarion. Armor. Okay guys, Legolas has the Deathstalker cloak, and we're actually gonna headcanon this to be the ring, because Legolas is actually evil in our campaign, but nobody knows. I'm playing, but anyways, this cloak makes it so we can go invisible after we kill something, giving us a critical on our next attack as long as we stay invisible until then. Remember, just like regular invisibility, most actions will cause you to lose it, so be mindful. Now, you can only get this if you make one of your characters the Dark Urge. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to be an evil character, but I would highly recommend it, and you will get this cloak at some unspecified point during Act 1. This isn't a necessity, being you need to have the Dark Urge, but it definitely deserves a mention on an archer build just like this one. Cloak of Cunning Broom. This cloak creates a foggy cloud whenever the wearer disengages engages. Very useful for Legolas, as this will blind the enemies in proximity and allow him to retreat while also having advantage on any follow-up attacks. Very useful to have, especially once we have our cunning actions, and you can purchase this one at Last Light Inn in Act 2. Shade Slayer Cloak. Possibly the best cloak in the entire game for our Legolas build. This cloak simply reduces our number to crit when we are hiding, which will be almost every turn by the time we unlock it. Definitely grab this one at the guild hall in the lower city sewers in Act 3. Adamantine Scale Mail. This is a set of 16 AC medium armor that you could honestly wear until the end of the game. It reduces all incoming damage by 1 and makes you immune to criticals. Also, when a melee attack hits you, you inflict a condition called reeling on them for 2 turns. This gives them a -1 penalty to their attack rolls for each turn remaining. If you have a frontliner wearing medium armor, I'd suggest giving this to them, but more often than not they will either be a barbarian or wearing heavy armor, leaving this available to Legolas. Elven Chain. This 14 AC medium armor is truly fitting for Legolas with elven elegance, but especially because it not only gives us advantage on dexterity saving throws, it gives a nice +2 bonus to our initiative, further ensuring Legolas gets the first hit at these higher levels. We may have better options available, but I had to mention this armor because it truly does fit Legolas so well. Purchase this at the Rivington General. Armor of Agility. This is a 17 AC medium armor that simply adds your full dexterity bonus to your armor class, which will provide Legolas with a huge AC buff, easily clearing 20. We also get a +2 to saving throws, which is another huge buff to this build. This might be better for more melee oriented dex users, but it does deserve a mention nonetheless. I'll be honest, in my playthrough I used Elven Chain with Legolas till the end of the game. You can buy this from the Stormshore Armory in Act 3. Gloves of Archery. These gloves grant proficiencies we already have, but more importantly we gain a +2 damage bonus to our ranged attacks. Absolutely perfect for Legolas and can quickly and easily be obtained by purchasing them from the trader at the Goblin Camp in Act 1. Stalker Gloves. A set of gloves that grants you a +1 bonus to initiative and buffing our sneak attack with 1 to 4 force damage, making for a very nice addition to our gear list. You purchase these in the lower city in Act 3. Haste Helm. You'll get this helmet super early on, and I recommend equipping it to Legolas. At the start of combat, Legolas will gain 3 turns of momentum, increasing his movement speed by 1.5 meters. You'll get this from a chest in the Blighted Village in Act 1. Marksmanship Hat. Simple but effective. This hat gives us a +1 bonus to our ranged and throwing attack rolls, and you can purchase this at Moonrise Towers in Act 2. The Speedy Light Feed. These medium armor boots will grant us +1 athletics and 3 electric charges whenever we dash during combat, which is especially useful after we unlock our cunning actions with Rogue 2 and can be stacked with other gear that grants you electric charges. I'm not going to go over every piece, but these electric charges give us a +1 bonus to our attack rolls while also adding 1 lightning damage. When these stack to 5, your next attack will have a bonus 1d8 lightning damage, consuming the charges in the process. Note that you will lose 1 charge every turn regardless, and you can find these in the Blighted Village. Boots of Speed. These boots are particularly useful until we gain our cunning actions because we get Click Heels, which is a bonus action dash, allowing us to double our movement speed on any given turn. These boots can be useful with any character, so make sure you pick them up from the gnome in the Myconid colony. Disintegrating Nightwalkers. This pair of boots grants you immunity to the listed effects and also gives Legolas the Misty Step spell, which is extremely useful as an archer, allowing us to escape combat and also gain the high ground on our enemies with a bonus action teleport. You'll get these from True Soul Near and Grimforge. Weapons. Hunting Shortbow. This is the first bow you should pick up right away from Dammon at the Emerald Grove. This +1 enchantment bow gives you advantage against monstrosity type enemies, but more importantly allows you to cast Hunter's Mark early on in the game. The Jolt Shooter. Our trusty Jolt Shooter. This bow will grant you 2 electric charges on a hit, which can be paired with the Speedy Light Feet and other pieces of gear if you are so inclined. You can get this bow at Joaquin's Rest after saving Floric. Titan String Bow. This +1 enchantment bow deals additional damage equal to our strength modifier, which is a great buff for Legolas with 16 strength and a +3 modifier. You can get this fairly early on in the game by purchasing it at the Zhentarim hideout. Bow of the Banshee. This is a +1 enchantment short bow that has a chance to inflict frightened on an enemy and also does a bonus 1d4 damage to creatures afflicted with frightened. You can buy this from Corsair Greymon in Grimforge or loot it from his corpse. Least Expected. Another short bow, however, with a +2 enchantment that gives a 1d4 bonus to our ranged attacks whenever we are obscured. You can find this in a chest in the Gauntlet of Shar. Darkfire Short Bow. This is a beautiful bow to have with a +2 enchantment that gives us fire and cold resistance, along with the ability to cast the goated Haste, which allows Legolas to take 2 actions instead of 1, increases our movement speed, and increases our armor class by 2, and can be used once per long rest. Pick this up from Damon at the Last Light Inn in Act 2. The Deadshot. This is a very rare +2 enchantment bow that reduces our critical hit number by 1 and also doubles our proficiency bonus when making attack rolls so long as we don't have disadvantage, making this one of the best bows we can obtain. You can purchase this one in the lower city in Act 3. Gontr Mael. Widely regarded as the absolute best bow in the game, we have the Gontr Mael. This is a +3 enchantment legendary bow that shines light, has a chance to inflict Guiding Bolt on a hit, and grants us Celestial Haste and Bolt of Celestial Light. Guiding Bolt is a condition that grants attackers advantage on their next attack against the affected creature. Celestial Haste is a version of haste that lasts for 5 turns and does not render the wielder lethargic afterwards and can be used once per long rest. Bolts of Celestial Light will frighten your target and cause your ranged attack afterwards to deal 1 to 4 radiant damage. With all of this, it's not hard to see why this is quite possibly the best bow in the entire game. You'll get this one after defeating the Steel Watcher Titan in the Steel Watch Foundry in Act 3. Knife of the Undermountain King. This is a +2 enchantment short sword that crits when we roll a 19, and when rolling a 2 or less for damage, we re-roll the dice and take the highest result. By having this weapon equipped, that effect applies to all of our attacks, not just ones using this weapon. It also gives us advantage on enemies that are lightly or heavily obscured. You'll get this one from the trader at the Githyanki Creche. Rhapsody. Rhapsody is a +1 enchantment dagger that grants us a +1 bonus to damage, attack rolls, and spell save DC for every enemy we kill up to a maximum of +3. It also has a chance to inflict bleeding when we attack with it while hiding or invisible, and you'll get this one from Cazador. Bloodthirst. Next up we have Bloodthirst, which is a +2 enchantment dagger that gives us the only good version of True Strike in the entire game, which is a bonus action. I can actually recommend applying it in desperate times as it will give you advantage on your next attack against the targeted enemy, and you can use this once per short rest. The real reason I recommend this dagger is because it reduces our number to crit by 1, stacking with anything else containing the same effect, and is a bound weapon, meaning it cannot be knocked out of our hands. If wielding this weapon in our main hand, whenever we hit an enemy, they will receive vulnerability to piercing damage, which is all of our attacks, so is extremely useful. But if you decide to wield this in your offhand, when an enemy misses you with a melee, you retaliate and gain True Strike, but I recommend keeping this as your main. You'll get this one from Orin. Trinkets. Amulet of Branding. This amulet gives you a special ability called Brand the Weak. I love this for Legolas because it allows him in all of his expertise to expose the weak points of an enemy, rendering them vulnerable to your choice of bludgeoning, slashing, or piercing damage. Make sure you use the correct damage type for your situation. Generally, you'll be using piercing for your bow, but sometimes you might want Aragorn or Gimli to follow up, as they will most likely be using slashing or bludgeoning. Make sure to choose the right one. Vulnerable is an extremely powerful debuff to apply, as it doubles the amount of damage you deal of that type. This condition lasts for 3 turns, and this ability only recharges on a long rest, so I recommend using it on bosses or high priority enemies. Surgeon's Subjugation Amulet. This is a very nice amulet to have because once per long rest, when you critical an enemy, you can paralyze them for 2 turns, which guarantees criticals on that enemy for 2 turns as well. The usefulness of this ability cannot be understated, so I definitely recommend recommend trying it out and switching to the Amulet of Branding after you have used the ability for the day. You'll get this from the boss in the House of Healing in Act 2. Crusher's Ring. This ring simply gives Legolas a 3-meter bonus to movement speed and can be obtained from Crusher's corpse at the Goblin camp. Shifting Corpus Ring. A decent ring for an archer as it grants the wielder the invisibility spell and blur spell, which can both be used once per long rest. Invisibility is pretty self-explanatory, but will also allow us to attack with advantage, while blur simply gives attackers disadvantage when trying to hit us. You'll get this one from Marcus at Last Light Inn in Act 2. Now, I will be releasing the Aragorn, Gimli, and Gandalf builds in the future, so make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss out on those or other content as well, and don't forget to leave a comment with any build suggestions or feedback. And with that being said, thank you all for stopping by, and until next time, purge evil.
Oh, yeah, crown in my palm, but I ain't put it on. Yeah, crown in my palm, but I ain't put it on. Yeah, crown in my palm, but I ain't put it on. Yeah, crown in my palm, but I ain't put it on. Yeah.